To my beloved granddaughter, Caitlin. I stared at the handwriting on the first page of the old diary, and my blood ran cold. This book didn't belong to a relative I knew. It belonged to Arthur, the neighbor my parents had spent 20 years teaching me to fear. They told me he was a monster, a stalker, a sick man who hurt children. But as I stood over his casket with the lawyer who had just handed me this box, the truth hit me harder than a physical blow. The man I had spent my life hiding from wasn't a stranger. He was my grandfather. And if he was my grandfather, then my parents weren't protecting me from a monster. They were hiding one. Before I tell you what monstrous secret was hidden in that diary, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. The key the lawyer gave me felt heavy and cold in my palm as I stood before the door of the house next to ours. For 29 years, this place had been the architecture of my nightmares. My parents had built a wall of terror around it, brick by psychological brick. But as the door creaked open, revealing not a dungeon, but a dusty living room filled with books and fading photographs, that wall began to crack. I sat in a worn armchair that smelled of pipe tobacco and opened the diary to the first marked page. The date was from 20 years ago. The ink was faded, but the words screamed. I saw her in the garden today. She looks just like her mother. I waved, but she ran away. Robert has terrified her. He has turned her own grandfather into a boogeyman. I stopped reading, my chest tightening as a memory clawed its way to the surface. I was 6 years old. I was playing in the front yard, and I saw the old man next door watching me. He smiled. I smiled back. Suddenly, my mother's hand clamped onto my shoulder, her nails digging in hard enough to bruise. She dragged me inside, slamming the door. "Don't you ever look at him, Caitlin," she had hissed, her face twisted into a mask of frantic urgency. "He's not like us. He's sick. Do you know what men like that do to little girls? They take them away and they never come back. He eats children, Caitlin. He is a monster." That was the trap they built for me. It wasn't a cage of iron bars. It was a cage of cultivated fear. They didn't just tell me to stay away. They planted a seed of absolute terror in my mind and watered it every day. Every time Arthur tried to say hello, my father would pull me close, acting the hero, protecting me from a threat that didn't exist. I grew up believing my parents were my saviors, standing between me and the darkness next door. But as I turned the pages of the diary, the truth bled out. March 12th, 1998. The night the world ended. Robert came to my door, covered in blood, reeking of whiskey. He was crying. He said it was an accident. He said he didn't see the tree. He said Sarah was dead. My breath hitched. Sarah. My mother. I had always been told she died of a heart attack in her sleep. A natural, tragic death. He begged me not to call the police, the diary continued. He said if I turned him in for drunk driving, he would go to prison for vehicular manslaughter. He said Caitlin would go into the system. He said I would never see my granddaughter again. He held you hostage, Caitlin. My own son used you as a human shield to bury his crime. The room spun. My father hadn't protected me from a monster. He was the monster. He had killed my mother. And then he had blackmailed his own father into silence, forcing Arthur to live next door as a pariah, paying my parents hush money, disguised as rent, just for the privilege of watching me grow up through a window. They had stolen my mother. They had stolen my grandfather. And they had stolen my reality. I closed the book. The fear that had ruled my life for 3 decades evaporated, replaced by something colder, sharper, and infinitely more dangerous. I didn't need to cry. I needed to plan. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the diary against the wall, or collapse in a heap of tears. In my line of work, you don't panic when you find rot beneath the varnish of a priceless painting. You get quiet. You assess the structural damage. And then you reach for your scalpel. For 29 years, my parents had painted a masterpiece of lies over the canvas of my life. They had crafted a portrait of a loving family, protecting their daughter from a deranged neighbor. Now, I was going to strip away the paint, layer by layer, until the ugly truth was exposed for the world to see. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed the number written on the last page of the diary. It was labeled simply, Miller. Detective Miller. A gravelly voice answered on the second ring. "This is Caitlin," I said, my voice steady cold. "Arthur's granddaughter." There was a long silence on the line, heavy with years of waiting. "He told me you might call one day," Miller said finally. "I'm sorry about your grandfather. He was a good man in a bad situation." "He says in the book that you knew," I said. "He says you knew about my mother." "We suspected," Miller corrected. "Arthur came to me 10 years ago. He wanted to turn your father in, but without physical evidence, without the car, without a body. Without a confession, it was just the word of an old man against a grieving widower. Your father played the part of the victim perfectly. He threatened to sue the department for harassment. He threatened to take you away so Arthur would never see you again. That was the checkmate. Arthur backed down to keep you close. The evidence is still here, I said, looking around the dusty room. Arthur didn't destroy it. He hid it. If we just find it, your father will claim Arthur planted it, Miller warned. A defense attorney will tear that apart in court. We need more, Caitlin. We need him to implicate himself. We need him to say it. I looked down at the floorboards. I thought about the greedy, desperate phone calls I'd ignored from my parents over the last week. They weren't grieving Arthur. They were grieving the loss of their rent checks. They were panicked about the money stopping. My parents were monsters, yes, but they were predictable monsters. Their wickedness was fueled by a singular consuming engine. Greed. I know how to get him to say it, I told Miller. I'm not going to look for the evidence, I said, watching a spider weave a web in the corner of the ceiling. I'm going to make them dig it up for me. I hung up the phone. The fear that had defined my childhood was gone, replaced by a clinical, razor-sharp clarity. My father thought he was the predator, the one who controlled the narrative. He didn't realize that the terrified little girl he raised had grown up to be an expert in uncovering hidden things. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the trap maker. I drove to my parents' house 2 days later. The lawn was perfectly manicured. The shutters painted a welcoming blue. It was the same facade of suburban perfection they had maintained while blackmailing a grieving old man next door. When I walked in, the air wasn't heavy with mourning. It was thick with panic. My father, Robert, was pacing the living room, a tumbler of scotch in his hand even though it was barely noon. My mother, Deborah, was sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by bills that I knew, thanks to the diary, had been paid for decades by Arthur's rent. You're finally here, my father snapped, not looking at me. Did you get the keys? Did the lawyer say anything about the estate? He didn't ask how I was. He didn't ask about the funeral. He didn't even pretend to be sad that his own father was dead. He was just a parasite realizing its host had withered away. I got the keys, I said, keeping my voice soft, hesitant. The voice of the scared little girl they thought they still owned. But Dad, I found something else. My mother looked up, her eyes sharp. What? I pulled a folded piece of paper from my pocket. It was a forgery I'd spent 3 hours perfecting the night before, mimicking Arthur's shaky handwriting from the diary. There was a letter inside the box the lawyer gave me. I lied. It talks about money. A lot of it. My father stopped pacing. The ice in his glass clinked loudly in the sudden silence. What money? Arthur says here that he didn't trust banks, I said, looking down at the paper as if I were struggling to understand it. He says he kept the insurance payout from the accident. I looked up, meeting my father's eyes. He says there is $650,000 in cash and bearer bonds hidden in a lockbox under the floorboards of the crawl space. The transformation was instantaneous and grotesque. The tension in my father's shoulders didn't relax. It coiled into a different kind of energy. Greed. Pure, predatory greed. 600,000? He whispered. 50, I corrected. $650,000. My mother stood up, her chair scraping violently against the floor. That's our money, she hissed. He owed us that. For all the trouble he caused. For the harassment. For making us live next to a monster. I watched them, feeling a cold detachment. They weren't talking about a monster. They were the monsters. They had bled my grandfather dry for 25 years, and now they were ready to pick the meat from his bones. I don't know what to do, I said, feigning anxiety. The letter says the key is hidden in the house, but I'm scared to go down there alone. You know how creepy that basement is. Give me the letter, my father demanded, snatching it from my hand. He scanned it, his eyes darting back and forth, devouring the lie. We're going over there. Now. Robert, it's broad daylight, my mother warned, glancing at the window. People will see. I don't care who sees, he shouted, grabbing his coat. That money belongs to this family. It's my inheritance. Okay, I said, I'll take you. As they rushed to the door, fumbling with their shoes, I checked my phone. One tap to send a signal to Detective Miller. The wire taped to my chest felt warm against my skin. They thought they were rushing toward a windfall. They didn't know they were running straight into the spider's web. The walk from our driveway to Arthur's porch took less than a minute, but it felt like crossing a timeline. Behind us was the suburban street where my parents played the role of respectable victims. Ahead was the truth. Buried in the dark, I unlocked the door. The house smelled of dust and old secrets. My father didn't wait for me to flip the switch. He pushed past me, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom, sweeping the room with frantic, jerky movements. Where? He barked. the letter said under the floorboards. Which room? The hallway, I said, pointing toward the back of the house. There's a maintenance hatch under the runner rug. It leads to the crawl space. My mother hesitated at the edge of the rug. It's filthy in there, Robert. It's $650,000, Deborah, he shouted, kicking the rug aside to reveal a rough, wooden square cut into the floor. He crouched down, prying it open with his fingers. The smell of damp earth and rot drifted up. Get the flashlight. I watched them descend. My father went first, sliding into the hole like a rat returning to its nest. My mother followed, hitching up her expensive skirt, her greed finally outweighing her vanity. I climbed down the ladder last, stopping on the bottom rung. The crawl space was a suffocating nightmare. The ceiling was low, you couldn't stand up, only hunch. The floor was packed dirt. Shadows danced violently against the brick foundation as my father swung the flashlight around. Here, I said, pointing to a patch of earth near the north wall that looked recently disturbed. I had loosened it myself the night before when I buried the box. He said he buried it deep. My father didn't need further instruction. He found an old, rusted spade leaning against a support beam and started hacking at the ground. Thud. Scrape. Thud. The sound echoed in the cramped space. I leaned against the ladder, feeling the small plastic casing of the wire taped to my chest. It was recording every heavy breath, every grunt of exertion. Faster, my mother hissed, holding the light steady. What if someone hears us? Nobody's listening to a dead man's house, Robert grunted, throwing a shovelful of dirt over his shoulder. It landed near my feet. I looked at them, sweating, dirty, eyes wide with avarice in the harsh LED glare. These were the people who had taught me to be afraid of the dark. But they weren't afraid. They belonged here. Dad, I said, keeping my voice innocent, curious. Why did he have so much money? You said he was broke. You said he was a charity case. He was a liar, Robert spat, slamming the spade into the clay. He had money. He just didn't want me to have it. But why did he owe it to you? I pressed. You said in the living room that it was your money. Why? Because I earned it. Robert stopped digging for a second, wiping sweat from his forehead with a muddy hand. He looked at me, his eyes wild. I spent 25 years living next to that judgment. 25 years letting him watch you. Do you know how hard that was? Knowing he was right there. You let him watch me because he paid you, I said. He paid for my silence, Robert shouted. He knew what would happen if he didn't. I had all the leverage. Just dig, my mother snapped. Find the box. Robert attacked the ground with fury, muttering about how he had protected the family, while his father judged him from afar. When the spade struck metal, his face twisted into triumph. For doing what was necessary, he whispered. He smashed the lock open, convinced he had won. But inside the box there was no money, only a shattered headlight and a blood-stained shirt. The evidence of the woman he killed. There is no money, he said slowly, finally understanding. There never was, I replied. Arthur donated the insurance money years ago. Realizing the trap, Robert turned violent. He raised the spade and lunged at me, only for a hidden wall to swing open as police flooded the space. Arthur had prepared for this moment long ago. Even in handcuffs, Robert screamed that he was still the heir, that the money would be his. I showed him the truth, the insurance policy, and the Slayer rule. By confessing to murder, he had legally disqualified himself from inheriting anything. It all goes to me, I said. The trial was brief. Both my parents received life sentences. I used the insurance money to transform Arthur's house into an art restoration studio, a place where broken things are repaired, not hidden. I tore down the fence that once kept the truth buried. Arthur loved me from the shadows so I could live in the light. The monsters are gone, and for the first time, the view is clear.